Well, good evening, Mr. Omar. I hope you're doing great. Welcome again in another round of meetings. Tonight, we're just going to talk a little bit about your English background, your study, and some kind of tips that you recommend for Iraqi students who are trying to explore English language during summer. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Walid. Thank you for having me. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, so there's a lot to talk about. First, to begin with, since we are dealing with English here, maybe we could tackle the topic of culture that is which I see is significantly relevant to the language learning, specifically English language learning. So I think this is one of the most important things to begin with right now. And whatever else that you would like to talk about, I'm also open to any suggestions.
So let's get started by asking you to tell us a little bit about your English and how you got started with this language. What kind of beginning you had with English language and how you started exploring this beautiful language?
I would say the beginning was with a very motivating teacher at the 12th grade, and she was one of the greatest people that I've met in my life. And she spoke English really well, and I think this is where I first picked up the language and got interested in the language. And beside that, she was also very encouraging. And when she saw that I was interested, she gave me specific attention, and that developed my love for the language. And I tried my best to try to impress her. And that's how I started. But then it developed on me. And throughout the years, English was the topic that I got the highest scores in. And then when I went to college, it was the topic that I chose to study. And eventually, I ended up with having my master and PhD in English language.
Okay, that's beautiful. So understanding what you said, there might be two elements that, aside from, the early age of learning language, the motivating teacher or instructor and the care that is given to you, bestowed on you by that lovely teacher, blessing of God be on her or him. I think these are very crucial elements of any good start when it comes to English language. And I really think that the major investment should be vested on these two items. And the first one is pretty much the same, but the one that I had on my side was on the high school. It was not the sixth preparatory class. It was the fifth. I had a teacher who graduated from Baghdad University, and he just came as a substitute teacher. And he was so fluent because he worked with the American Army for some time before he comes to our school. So when I heard that beautiful musical language that was just coming out of his mouth, I was really fascinated. So I think this age or this age group is really important to be paid attention to, because it's going to be the trajectory of your success in language. Tell us a little bit about your study abroad and what has it to do with English, and how did it add to your value as an English instructor now?
Definitely, it was helpful in many ways, but I think one of the most important ways that it was helpful is that it enabled me to see the culture, lifestyles, and the everyday life of the people who spoke the native language. And this was eventually reflected in my own teaching. And that's why the first topic that I started with you was the culture. So the way I see it, if you don't understand the culture, which is a topic that is very germane to learning English, you will never be able to be, I would say, fluent, culturally fluent, because the way you use language is in formal situations, which is mostly used in learning, is could be very different from the way it is used in everyday life. So it was very helpful in helping me see how it is used in reality by real people, and being exposed to daily situations and daily lifestyles of the native speakers of the language and the culture was very helpful in being significant in me comprehending what might have been very difficult in other contexts if I was not exposed to the culture.
I know it's really challenging for a person who's just coming out of Iraq with the kind of conflict that we've gone through for many consecutive years, to have an eye-opening experience like the one and becoming an alumni and a facilitator later for any student who would like to share or replicate the kind of experience you've gone through. I really advocate for the value of culture and fostering culture. So I'm an advocate of the fact that culture cannot be isolated from language, because language survives in the microcosmic atmosphere of culture. So culture is really important. And I think you mentioned it 4 times during this short conversation, which gives it the impactful meaning that we cannot isolate culture from language. They work hand in hand, and understanding language should be quintessential element to understanding culture, and understanding culture is interchangeably important when it comes to understanding language. Do you think culture should be emphasized more in the Iraqi context? And if yes, how do you go about introducing British and American culture as part of the global culture when it comes to language? Or you have another approach?
Well, definitely it should be focused on more. Not only that, I think the teachers need to be trained more on this topic. Yeah. Okay. Was you first? Yeah, I think the teacher is trained on this topic, and they should probably get some courses and understanding the significance of culture. And as you said, they go hand in hand, culture and learning. Unless you master both, then you would not be able to deliver the information to the students. And I think the way that is followed here, I think they go more with the British. And this is also problematic because what kind of British are we talking about? Are we C pronunciation? Yeah. Are we talking about Wales? Are we talking about Scottish English? So
yeah,
there's no one way to deal with this, but all in all, there should be an element of culture, should be involved in teaching students the English language. And from my experience in the United States, if I were to teach students, I think I would follow the US culture, because nowadays it is, due to globalization, you can see it in everyday.
It's I mean,
it is on the internet. Whatever happens, for example, in Hollywood, or whatever happens on whatever social media that is controlled or that is sponsored by an American figure, then it would eventually be kind of a source of cultural, I wouldn't say exchange, but cultural exposition, if that's right. And you would be exposed to that culture on a daily basis. So why not make use of it? why not teach students and make students aware of this fact, and so that when they learn the language, then they would learn it in its own culture and not decontextualize. Because when you decontextualize the language, you are not using the language that is used in its native context. So it is significant, but which one do you use? That's the question that should be posed to those who are, responsible for making the curriculums in Iraq. And I would like to hear your take on this as well.
Actually, it's very controversial or controversial in and of itself, because there's so much politicization of it. And the case for the accent or dialect has been so much marketed to a point of saturation. And I think the Iraqi learners fall in two teams in an ignorant way, because the issue of accent or dialect is minor when it comes to the deliverability of the materials and the kind of learning that they have to go through. However, your approach is really likable, and there should be some sense of hybridization of the kind of introduction that the teacher goes by, selecting few items from British, Australian, Canadian, American, Indian, Malaysian, Indonesian, even Emirati people who speak English, selecting samples, with augmented reality and the advanced technology nowadays. We can bring even virtual reality into the classroom and showing people that language is not about the team of British people and American people. Language goes beyond that. It's not like being in a conflict with another person just because the way they sound. That's really ridiculous. We should not be blind of the trees and not see the whole picture or the whole forest. We are missing the forest for the trees, and we are not focusing on the bigger picture. So this marketing of British English, I think, and in my own interpretation, came from the stigmatization that American legacy left in this country since 1990s. And what followed of consecutive war and Gulf War and Civil War and the American invasion, all of that had repercussions on the judgment of whether English American version is conducive to being teachable in the Iraqi context. However, I think we would be very blinded if we say, well, British English is more important because, hey, look at Hollywood and what they are doing with Netflix and Amazon and all the streaming channels on online and YouTube, and they are dominating Paul Logan is dominating YouTube. So the case to be made here is, I think, in Arabic, in Holy Quran, we say, وَمَا يُنَبِّئُكَ مِثْلُ خَبِيرٍ. Listen to experts. Just don't listen to the marketed language by English centers or by channels who promotes for certain kind of accent that is better. I mean, to some extent, if they are marketing that in alignment with good teaching materials and qualified instructors, so be it. Just teach them to speak in this category of speakers or speaking accent or that one. Just get them out of this loophole and let them look at the general beautiful spectrum of language, the whole gamut of colors of accents and dialects, and don't get stuck in this kind of chicken and egg debate. What do you think?
Well, definitely, I agree with that. But the reason why I said go with the American culture is not to follow it precisely in and by itself. This is definitely not my point here. But what I'm saying is, if it's in every house now, if it's It's always with us. Why not make use of it positively? So
That's
that
the
we are
elephant
aware
in the room.
exactly. Why not talk about it? We should talk about it, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, why avoid it? Because if we avoid the problem, this does not mean that it doesn't exist. And if it exists, then we should talk about it. And this is why I'm saying, if you know something and you realize that it's there, and if you think it is dangerous to in one way or another, then definitely talk about it and see how you can use it positively or make use of it at least. So if it's there, this is controversial actually, and I mean, why follow the British? I mean, the British are also. I mean, the British culture is also. It could also be politicized. So if you're teaching one version or another, then this does not mean that one of them may be marketed as politicized or as negative, and the other as more positive. They're both in the same boat. So at the time when they chose British, it was the most prevailing, I think. But now, language is dynamic. I mean, it
Actually,
changes, and
definitely
the preference also changes.
It's really dynamic. Language is dynamic to the point that the next day you wake up, you have to catch up with what the kind of things that just went online viral, and you need to cope up with the terminology out there. The other day I was reading something and I came across the word irksome, IRKSOME. And for me, that word, I've seen it like 10 years ago, probably. And I didn't think that's going to be that common. And then it just happened to be very common in English. Just because I didn't listen to it doesn't mean that it's not common. So focusing on vocabulary that are common, and focusing on idiomatic expressions, most common expressions, terminology that are within the field, within the territory of your expertise is really important. And even let's be factual more. A standardized test like IELTS and TOEFL, they never mention the word accent. They never. They say diversity of vocabulary. They say advanced vocabulary. They say lexical diversity. They say grammatical range and accuracy, but they never mention the word accent.
Exactly.
Why?
Yeah.
Is it because it's important?
I mean, even when you take the test,
definitely
they judge
on your deliverability.
And also the listening test. Each segment of the test, you would hear a different accent, because what they want to test is your ability to comprehend different accents, and they are not stuck to only one, the British or the American.
If learners are perceptible to different kind of accents and different kind of dialects, that means they are in advanced level. So it's not a matter of speaking an American accent or British accent that matters. I think this is a very futile kind of debate that is promulgated by certain group of people just to stigmatize this accent and not that accent. And I think this is a legacy of the old obsolete kind of method of teaching. What's your take on that?
Exactly. Yeah. And just to make my point clear, and I'm not, advocating one or another culture. And
of course,
the reason why I'm talking about the American culture is because it's neglected here. We are giving a blind side or a blind eye to this kind of culture, which is, even though it is very common nowadays, it is very widespread, and it is part of the language, of the native language. The United States, there are about more than, I think, 400 million people who speak the language.
Well, so 375 or something.
Well, you're an expert on this, so yeah, about that. Why neglect it? Why give a blind eye to it? Well, there's a saying in Arabic that says, if you know the language of the people, then you will be safe from their danger, or something along those lines. So Why are we giving a blind eye? If that's the reason why we are not, not paying more attention to the American culture, then at least we should be aware of this culture, and we should be utilizing this culture in our teaching, and which I think is very helpful. And most of the modern ways of teaching languages in general come from the United States, I believe. So there you go. There you have it. I mean,
I think
I'm not saying
the
we
teaching
should
model that
ignore
they're
the British, but we should be more comprehensive of
when
the
I was
whole.
when I was
as many
back in
accents
the
as
United
possible.
States, I think there's some delay in the voice. When I was studying back in the United States, I was taught by a Malaysian professor, British professor, Australian and Canadian professor. So those professors are coming from different backgrounds. They're different from different accents. But the detrimental factor of their excellence as instructors is the amount of experience that they shared, the publications that they've published, the wealth of knowledge that they have. All of that is far more prioritized than just this minuscule thing that is called accent. The pinnacle of any person's excellence in language is understanding culture, understanding customs, understanding the way they the culture and language. I mean, we cannot isolate language, we cannot deskin language from where it originates, because a lot of analogies, a lot of metaphors, a lot of expressions, a lot of idiomatic expressions that we use in language, even grammar, is determined by the kind of culture or culture that is stemming from. Like, for example, in Ebonics or Black English, they don't use the third person singular in some cases. So they say, for example, he do the work instead of he does the work. And this is very common in the suburban areas of New York. And
this is let me interrupt you here. This is why I'm calling for culture to be embedded with the learning and teaching of English, because to someone who is not exposed to the African American dialect,
they will become
African
very
American language,
judgmental.
they will, yeah, exactly. They would say
Yeah.
that this is an ungrammatical way of talking in English or speaking in English. So that's why it's germane. It's definitely important that we give it more attention.
I think this debate is very global in its scope. And I was listening to a lecture this morning by a Moroccan professor. And he was talking about the debate between two Arab linguists from the old ages. And they were, one of them, they had this kind of grammar debate during that time, I think in the Abbasid reign or the Umayyi reign, or some hundreds years ago. And the first linguist was judging by how many people use that expression. They were debating on a grammatical structure. One was from Kufa, the other was from Basra. And Basra school of language, of grammar, or Nahu, was in a heated debate with the Kufis linguists. And the Kufi follow what's more common in spoken, which is equivalent to nowadays descriptivists or in modern linguistics. While those people in Basra, they were following the prescription of grammar. So they were following, right? They were prescriptivists. So there was this debate, and they ended up like the one from Kufa wins the debate. And when it comes to the bottom of the problem, we find that they were both correct, but the perception of the authority will determine which one is right and which one is wrong. So to your lens, which one is more common is not equivalent to which one is more likable, because some other people may stigmatize English. That is with the rhotic R. So saying R is just an indicator that you're Americanizing your pronunciation. On the other hand, if you drop the R, which happened to be followed the presence of R, ironically, they will think of you as the standard. However, what's ludicrous from my own perception, of course, is that those people who advocate for dropping R in their teaching and pedagogy, they end up saying it.
Well, that's where interference comes into play, because if you have it in your own mother language, then it is inevitable that you drop it in all of the words that you use. There must come some sort of context, a situation where you just use it unconsciously, and there you have it. This is another another form of why we need to be more exposed to the cultures. And I'm not, because I focused on the American, I forgot to mention that it's not only the American that we have. For example, if you watch the Peaky Blinders, then I think most of English learners in Iraq would not be able to understand what the character is saying without subtitles. And I myself sometimes find it very hard to understand what they're saying without using subtitles, because I'm not exposed to the culture, because their culture or the background from which they come is not very common to me. And that's why I need more knowledge about this background. And this takes me to a very related topic, which is the words themselves. Words themselves are not used always with the same meaning. They depend on the context in which they are found, and not only the context, and by context, one of the elements of context is the culture in which it is used. And so when you're saying that, for example, biscuit is not the same, doesn't have the same meaning in the United States and in Great Britain. So they use two different words, and if you say biscuit in UK, then it would mean something else, which is chips to probably chips to the Americans. So
ostensibly in the Iraqi contexts, there's been exaggeration and ostracization. They ostracize the American dialect or the American trend of teaching. And I think when it comes to analyzing the case here, you wouldn't find that there is any justifiable reason for that. I think conspicuously, the idea of introducing language, whether in American or British or Australian or Canadian, it serves the purpose, because you're using language as a means of communication, and no matter how much kind of exaggeration you put, you end up with what the kind of materials that they are learning. And I think this comes from the fact that they are unaware of the depth of the issue.
Definitely, there is some sort of ignorance in this area. And you mentioned the Canadian and the Australian. Talking about the Australians, there's also the Australian accent, which sometimes
Aussie.
they clip. Yeah, Aussie. Exactly. This is what I'm talking about when they use clippings. When they clip the words, for example, they say brekkie and Aussie. Yeah, all those things. So this is also another difference here. So definitely exposure to culture, and since we are focusing on British English, I think there needs to be more attention given to the British culture. And now when I say the British culture, I'm also thinking about modern day UK, which is also filled with so many people who come from different backgrounds and different ethnicities. And now if you go to London, for example, then it is there's a very high likability that there you would be someone who is Arab, who's Iraqi, who is from Afghanistan, Pakistan, etc. because I have so many friends there, and they tell me that I've never been to London myself, but the way I see how it goes on TV and on social media, and from what my friends are telling me, there's definitely some kind of cultural change. So when we say the culture of the UK, are we talking about the culture of the white people, or are we talking about the Arabs or the Africans, or people from India? So
I think nowadays with the presence of statistics, we cannot be very factual and over generalize the fact that the British English or British accent or British dialect is dominating the British community, because look at Ireland. They like to talk with their own accent, and to some extent those people in Manchester, they want to show off their labor and workers accent, and those people in Londoners, they like to show off the kind of accent that is kind of mixed with French to some extent, especially when it comes to cuisine. So the fact that we're talking about numbers, and numbers don't lie, that the percentage of people who speak British accent compared to those people who are immigrants, second generation immigrants, people coming, tourists from all walks of life, from all countries, are reshaping the perception of language. And our tips for our audience: try to be open-minded, don't be very judgmental or take things to the extreme and saying, well, British accent is the standard and everything else is wrong. Because what is your response to this kind of statement, Omar?
Well, definitely. The statistics don't lie, as you said, and because due to immigration and due to other factors nowadays, the geopolitics is in a constant state of changing. So we need to be up to date about those kind of things as teachers of English, and we need to be constantly updating our curriculum in order to cope with what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
Omar, so
this kind of conversation should continue in our next meeting. This is an introduction to the discussion of dialects and accents. And thank you so much for giving us a little bit of background about your study. In the upcoming meetings, we'll definitely choose a heated, controversial topic to elaborate more and probably to shed some light on the variations of American and British English, and which one deserves more attention in our curriculum, and choosing the right materials for study of language. We can dedicate an episode to talk about writing and how you improve your writing based on your publications. You've done a bit of that, and maybe we can dedicate an episode to talk about media and journalism and analyzing news context. I think this is something of an interest to you.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm tapping on your experience in this territory. I think we are, when it comes to the analytical approach of news and media, we are just walking in a minefield. So we're going to be careful, and then ready and equipped with the right apparatus to walk through that kind of field carefully and with a critical point of view to the kind of news, because people are brainwashed, people are tricked, people are fooled, and the greatest mass destruction weapon that media is using is called language. So by language, through language, and with language, we get either very critical or brainwashed. Omar, thank you so much. I look forward for another meeting. Keep in mind, this is going to be our next discussion. Sorry to take this recess time of yours and your family and dedicating it to discussing the bigger picture and the bigger message that we have with language. Thank you so much, Omar.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You're more than welcome.
Maybe we could make a podcast about this topic as well.
Definitely. And, this is something that I'm thinking of as a side thread to our discussion.
All right.
Enjoy your night. Happy Eid, and see you soon, inshallah.
See you soon.
See you.
انطفت الكهرباء وياي.
اوكي حبيبي عاشت ايدك. انا راح اوقف التسجيل هسه و